In the 41st millennium, the Imperium of man spans 1,000,000 worlds, a bastion of humanity in a galaxy steeped in terror. Its survival hinges on a single miraculous light, the Astronomicon, a psychic beacon that guides starships through the hellish warp. It is a symbol of divine hope, powered by the godlike emperor enthroned on Terra. But all lights cast shadows. This is not the story of heroes, generals, or inquisitors. This is the story of Larentovich, a lowly palace attendant who polishes golden halls and mops up after sacred rituals. He is nothing, a speck of dust in the grandest of machines. But when he begins to hear faint, hungry whispers from the golden throne itself, he uncovers a blasphemous truth. The light that guides humanity is fueled by an endless, screaming sacrifice. And he must choose between his faith, his sanity, and revealing a horror that could shatter the Imperium forever.
The horrifying life of a servant in the Emperor's palace begins and ends with blood. This is the first and last truth beaten into us from the moment we take our oaths. My name is Larentovich. It is a name that means nothing, a label for a living tool. For 7 long, soul-crushing years, I have polished these endless golden halls by day and assisted with the dreadful, secretive rituals by night. My world is one of gleaming surfaces and shadowy truths, of sacred chants and silent screams. I have held the bowls, cold, heavy, ornate things of priceless gold that catch the still warm blood of sacrifices. I have seen the light fade from 1,000 eyes, felt the final, faint breath of the devout on my cheek. I have disposed of what remains afterward, the physical shell that is no longer needed, carrying it to the sanctified incinerators, where flesh and bone become the very ash that flavors our incense. It is a cycle as eternal as the throne itself. The incense, oh, the incense! It burns constantly, a perpetual offering. Its heavy, cloying clouds hang like a stifling funeral shroud in every echoing corridor, every vaulted chamber. They say its scent pleases him, that it carries our prayers to his crippled consciousness. They say, in quieter, more practical tones, that it masks other, fouler smells. The coppery tang of blood, the stench of fierce sweat, the faint, sweet odor of decay that even the most rigorous cleaning cannot entirely erase. Both statements are true. I have breathed it for so long that I do not remember the taste of clean air. It has soaked into my robes, my skin, the very marrow of my bones. I will carry the scent of sanctity and death with me to my own grave, wherever that may be. But then, about a year ago, the whispers started. It began not as a sound, but as a pressure, a cold spot in the center of my mind on a day when the sacrifices had been particularly numerous. I was cleaning the grand processional, my mop pushing pink-tinged water across marble veined with gold, when I felt it, a presence vast and ancient and unbearably lonely. I shook it off, attributing it to exhaustion, to the strange whispering acoustics of the palace that sometimes made the wind sound like voices. Then came the voices themselves, faint, ghostly things that seemed to emanate not from the air, but from the golden walls themselves, from the very throne at the heart of this labyrinth. At first, they were mere fragments, like pages torn from a book and scattered in a gale. A single word, more. A feeling of profound, gnawing hunger. A flash of imagery, a star dying, a galaxy shivering, an endless, aching cold. They were most potent during the rituals. As the lifeblood of a chosen devotee flowed into the channels that fed the golden throne, the whispers would rise from a murmur to a chorus, a cacophony of need that made my teeth ache and my vision swim. I noticed then that other senior attendants had developed a certain stillness, a hollow look in their eyes. I saw them, when they thought no one was looking, press the heels of their hands against their temples as if to silence a persistent pain. And I watched, with a cold knot tightening in my gut, as one by one they disappeared. Reassigned, our overseer, a man named Kalen with a face like stone and eyes like chips of flint, would say, transferred to duties in another wing of the palace. But we never saw them again. Their personal effects, a worn data slate, a carved stone from a homeworld they would never see again, a threadbare spare robe, would remain in their cells untouched until a new, wide-eyed attendant was moved in. The questions died on our lips before they were born. To ask was to draw attention. To draw attention in the shadow of the golden throne was to invite a fate worse than any reassignment. I learned the art of silence. I became a ghost in the machine, polishing, cleaning, disposing, preparing. I moved with the quiet efficiency expected of me, my face a mask of devout placidity. But beneath the mask, I was screaming. The whispers were peeling away my sanity, layer by layer. I knew things I should not know. I had seen in my mind's eye things I could unsee, the true face of the power that sustained our Imperium, not a benevolent god, but a ravenous, fractured entity. What happens when a speck of dust, a nothing, a servant, discovers the terrible, blasphemous truth behind what powers the Astronomicon, the sacred light that guides humanity's ships through the hellish warp? What does that speck do with such damning knowledge? My name is Lorentovic. I am nothing. I am a cleaner, a washer of floors, a polisher of blood-spattered railings, a disposer of things that must never, ever be spoken of. I am an attendant in the holiest, most terrifying place in the entire galaxy, and I am drowning in a sea of blood that only I seem to see. The incense burns day and night, its heavy clouds a perpetual shroud. They say it pleases him. They say it masks the smell. Both are true, although the latter more than the former, I think. I have cleaned the censers. I know the grim ingredients. It is not just rare woods and resins. It is cremation ash from the faithful, the final physical essence of those who gave their lives. It gives the smoke a certain weight, a gritty, desolate texture that common incense lacks. It is the smell of martyrs, and it burrows into your soul. When I close my eyes at night in my small cold cell, I do not find peace. I see the golden light of the palace reflecting off miles of slick, wet marble. I feel the familiar, weary weight of my mop in my calloused hands, pushing crimson-tinged water towards grates that lead somewhere deep below, somewhere I dare not even contemplate. The drains swallow the evidence of our holy work, gurgling their ascent. Every day is the same relentless cycle. Clean, polish, dispose, prepare, assist, observe, and most importantly, forget. The last task is the most crucial and the most impossibly difficult. To remember is to go mad. To speak of what you remember is to die.
The Adeptus Custodes are the golden gods of this underworld. They stride through the halls, their footsteps unnervingly silent despite their immense size. 3 meters tall, encased in armor that seems to glow with its own inner light, they are inhuman in their perfection, their purpose, their cold indifference. They rarely acknowledge our existence. When their helmeted heads turn in our direction, it is with the same focus one might give a malfunctioning servitor. A calculation of utility, assessment of threat. We are tools to them, animate and breathing, but tools nonetheless. A scrubbing brush does not merit a greeting. Neither do we. When they do speak to us, their voices filtered through their helmets' vox grills, it is with a dispassionate clarity that brooks no argument. The instructions are always simple, direct and final. Attendant. The Western antechamber requires purification. The rite of solace begins in 1 hour. Prepare the implements. There is no please, no thank you. There is only the expectation of perfect, immediate obedience. I have held the bowls. I have laid out the cold, sharp ceremonial blades on cloth of the finest silk, their edges gleaming in the candlelight. I have helped the silent robed acolytes strap down those few chosen who, in their final moment of clarity, struggled against their glorious fate. My hands have trembled, but I have never faltered. I have disposed of the remains, my stomach churning, my heart a frantic bird in a cage of bone. I have done it all without question, without visible hesitation. All for him, all for Terra, all for the salvation of a humanity that does not know the price of its continued existence. So I was taught. So I desperately, fervently believed. But the whispers are eroding that belief, like water on stone. There was a chamber, deep within the inner sanctum, that we lowly attendants spoke of only in hushed, fearful tones. Chamber 17. Selection for duty there was supposedly random, a great honor. But those who were chosen never smiled when they received the summons. They never met our eyes as they left. And when they returned, if they returned at all, they were changed. Their eyes were empty, their movements jerky, as if they had seen something that had broken a fundamental part of their mind. I feared that chamber more than I feared the custodes, more than I feared death itself. The day Overseer Kalen called my name, the blood drained from my face. "Attendant Tovik," he said, his voice flat, "you will assist in Chamber 17 tonight." The words fell on me like a death sentence. The air grew thick and cold around me. I felt the gazes of the other attendants, heavy with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. None offered congratulations. None spoke at all. I bowed my head, my throat too tight, too dry for words. Yes, Overseer. That day passed in a blur of routine tasks performed with a numb mechanical precision. My mind, however, was a raging storm. What waited in Chamber 17? Why did those who went there return as hollowed-out shells? Would I return at all? For a wild, terrifying moment, I considered flight. But where would I go? The Imperial Palace is a world unto itself, a city-sized labyrinth of corridors, chambers, and sealed sectors. Beyond its walls lay Terra, a planet I knew only from pict recordings and heavily censored data slates. A teeming, polluted hive world that would swallow a lone palace attendant without a trace. I was a servant of the Golden Throne. I existed only to serve. There was nowhere else for me. As the Luma globes dimmed to simulate night, I reported to the antechamber outside room 17. 2 custodians stood guard, their golden armor reflecting the flickering light of the few sconces. They were statues of living metal, utterly still. Between them stood a door unlike any other I had seen, a massive slab of adamantium, an ancient dark oak, carved with scenes from the Emperor's conquest of Terra, scenes so old the details had been worn smooth by time. "Attendant Tovik, reporting as ordered," I said, my voice a strained whisper. One of the custodians inclined his helmeted head a bare fraction. "You will observe complete silence once inside. You will follow all instructions without hesitation. You will forget what you see when you leave." I swallowed hard, the sound obscenely loud in the quiet. "Yes, my lord." The custodian studied me for a long, unnerving moment, his faceless gaze seeming to strip me bare. "The Emperor's light shines brightest in the darkness, attendant. Remember that." With that cryptic, chilling statement, he stepped aside. The massive door swung open silently on perfectly balanced hinges, revealing only darkness within. The smell hit me first. It was not the familiar scent of incense and blood. This was older, muskier, the smell of ancient paper and dust, of ozone and cold stone, of power so immense it had a scent, a metallic electric tang that coated the tongue. It was the smell of secrets, of ages long past, of things that should have remained forgotten. I entered Chamber 17, and in that moment I understood everything. I understood why those who served here never spoke of it, why they returned with empty eyes and trembling hands, why some did not return at all. The chamber was vast and circular, its walls not of gold or marble, but of a dark, porous stone that seemed to drink the light. And these walls were lined, floor to a ceiling lost in shadow, with bookshelves. But these were no ordinary books. They squirmed on their shelves, their bindings made of materials I could not identify, what looked like flesh, metal, shifting crystal. Their spines were marked with characters that hurt my eyes to look upon, scripts that writhed and twisted if stared at for too long. In the center of the room stood a dais of black obsidian, and upon that dais, I cannot describe what I saw there, not fully. My mind, even now, shies away from the memory. It was a tear in reality itself, a wound in the fabric of our dimension. It was not black, not white, but a shifting, pulsating void of non-color, around which the air shimmered and warped. Around this aperture moved figures clad in deep crimson robes, their garments marked with symbols similar to those of the Holy Inquisition, but subtly wrong, distorted, as if viewed through a warped lens or a fever dream. One of them glided toward me, its face hidden within a deep hood. "The implements," it said. Its voice was neither male nor female, but something between, or perhaps beyond, a dry rustle like dead leaves. A gloved hand, too long and too thin, gestured to a table I hadn't noticed before, upon which rested an array of tools both familiar and alien.
Alongside the standard golden bowls and ritual knives were curved blades that seemed to bend in impossible directions, containers of what looked like living glass that pulsed with a faint, sickly light, and other more obscure instruments whose purpose I dared not guess. I moved to the table on unsteady legs and began arranging the items as I had been trained, my hands working automatically while my eyes kept straying back to the dais, to the wrongness at its heart. And from that wrongness I heard the whispers more clearly than ever before. 17, they said, a chorus of fractured voices. 17 is where we wait. 17 is where we reach through. 17 is where the veil thins. My hands, slick with cold sweat, lost their grip on a particularly wicked-looking knife with a serrated edge. It clattered to the stone floor, the sound shockingly loud in the chamber's unnatural acoustics. All movement in the room ceased. Every hooded head turned toward me. The silence was heavier, more menacing than any sound. I hastily retrieved the knife, my mind screaming apologies, despite the strict instruction for silence. The nearest robed figure glided closer, leaning in until I could see nothing but the darkness within its hood. "He hears them," it said to another, its voice a sibilant whisper. The other responded, its tone of cold interest. "This one hears already." "Then he is ready," the first one concluded. "Mark him for the special procession." Ice flooded my veins, so cold it burned. I had heard those words whispered among attendants late at night, a ghost story we told each other to make our own mundane terrors seem smaller. Those marked for the special procession were never seen again. Not reassigned, not transferred, simply gone, erased. I continued my work, my hands now shaking so violently I could barely place the implements in their correct order. The figures returned to their work at the dais, manipulating the tear in reality in ways I could not comprehend. And all the while, the whispers grew more insistent, more personal, slithering directly into my mind. "Join us," they crooned. "Feed us. Become us." The hours in that nightmare chamber stretched into an eternity. I performed my duties like an automaton, passing tools when a silent gesture demanded it, removing substances I refused to identify, cleaning spills that seemed to move with a life of their own. When I was finally dismissed with a curt wave, I fled rather than walked, ignoring the curious, fearful glances of other attendants in the outer halls. Back in my cell, I scrubbed my hands with harsh lye soap until they were raw and bleeding, but I could not remove the sensation of wrongness that clung to them, a psychic filth that had seeped into my pores. Sleep was impossible. I lay on my cot, staring at the bare gray ceiling, the whispers now a constant, maddening companion. "They have marked you," the voices told me, a symphony of grim satisfaction. "The special procession awaits." I knew then that my time was short. Whatever fate awaited those in the special procession would soon be mine. I was not being prepared for a new duty. I was being prepared for an end. But a new desperate resolve began to kindle within me, a spark in the overwhelming darkness. If I was to be damned, I would not go quietly. I would not be a passive sacrifice. I would learn the truth, all of it. The horrific life of a servant in the Emperor's palace begins and ends with blood. But my story, I swore to the silent, listening walls of my cell, would not end with passive acceptance. It would end with truth.
The knowledge that I was a marked man changed everything. The polished floors I cleaned were no longer just surfaces to be maintained. They were a labyrinth I had to navigate. The golden walls were not just adornments, they were prison bars. The whispers were no longer just a symptom of a fraying mind. They were a source of intelligence, however terrible. My routine continued, but now it was a shield, a performance of perfect normalcy behind which a frantic, secret war was being waged. I cleaned with a new, desperate purpose. As I polished the railings along the grand processional, I paid meticulous attention to the reflections in their gleaming surfaces, watching the comings and goings of adepts and tech priests. Memorizing the patterns of the custodians' patrols, I noted which doors were opened with biometric scans, which required vocal passcodes, and which were sealed with ancient physical locks. When I disposed of refuse, I no longer simply incinerated everything. I began to sift, carefully and secretly. Along with the ashes and the soiled ritual cloths, I found discarded data slates with fragmented logs, torn parchment from administrative missives, and even the occasional spent power cell from a custodian's guardian spear. Most were useless, but some contained fragments of information: a name, a location, a reference to a Project Chimera or Threshold protocol. I committed them all to memory, building a patchwork understanding of the palace's secret geography. I prepared myself for the rituals with a clinical detachment that masked my terror. As I laid out the blades and bowls, my eyes scanned the officiants, the acolytes, the other attendants. Who else heard the whispers? I saw the telltale signs: the slight, involuntary twitch of an eye, the way a senior attendant named Alara would sometimes pause, her head cocked as if listening to a distant sound, her face a mask of serene devotion that never quite reached her haunted eyes. We never spoke of it, but a silent understanding passed between us. We were the haunted, the chosen, the damned. The whispers themselves became my grim tutors. They were fragments of a shattered consciousness, but within that chaos were slivers of memory, of knowledge. I learned to sift through the constant static of hunger and pain for clearer signals. I heard names I did not recognize: Malcador, Valdor, names from a history, so ancient it was, myth. I felt echoes of immense power, of a great war fought in realms beyond human comprehension, of a betrayal that had shattered a golden dream. Most of all, I felt the correlation. It was a dreadful, inescapable calculus. When the sacrifices were few, the whispers were faint, receding like a tide, leaving behind a temporary, fragile peace in my mind. But when the rituals were frequent, when the blood flowed freely to feed the throne, the whispers surged into a roaring torrent, a psychic scream of agony and need that threatened to scour my sanity away. The Astronomican's light, I realized, was not a pure, divine flame. It was a bonfire, and we were throwing souls onto it to keep it from guttering out. One evening, after a particularly grueling series of rites, I found myself assigned to clean the outer vestibule of the scriptorium, a place where low-level adepts copied and catalogued astronomical data related to the Astronomicon's beacon. I was on my hands and knees, scrubbing at a scuff mark on the floor, when I overheard two adepts speaking in hushed, worried tones. "Fluctuation in the Beta 7 sector," one was saying, his voice tight with anxiety. "The beam intensity dropped by 0.3% for precisely 4.7 seconds during the last equinox cycle. The consumption metrics are up. The master of the Astronomicon has authorized an additional 20 souls per cycle from the novice nobilis tithe. They're not pleased." It's not enough. The degradation is logarithmic. The throne's efficiency continues to fall. The special procession. The numbers have tripled in the last decade. My blood ran cold. My scrubbing slowed to a halt as I strained to hear more. "A temporary measure," the first adept said, but he sounded uncertain. "Until the Mechanicus can stabilize the core interface." "The Mechanicus," the second one scoffed quietly. "They haven't truly understood the throne's workings since the age of apostasy. They maintain it through ritual and rote memory. They are priests, not engineers. There is no solution, only management of the decline." Their conversation was cut short as a senior adept swept into the room, and they quickly returned to their work, their faces pale. I resumed my scrubbing, my mind reeling. What I had suspected was true. The system was failing, the hunger was growing, and the special procession was not an honor. It was a desperate escalation. Later that night, in the communal washroom, I saw Ilara. She was staring into the reflective steel of the wall, her hands gripping the basin, her knuckles white. The water ran, unnoticed.
"Ilara," I said softly. She jumped, her eyes wide with a fear she quickly masked. "Larentovich, you startled me." "The whispers are loud tonight," I ventured, a dangerous Tistan. Her eyes narrowed, and she glanced around to ensure we were alone. She gave a barely perceptible nod. "They are always loud after the equinox rites. The alignment, it strains him. The pain, it's immense." She shuddered. "You feel it too? The pain?" "Not just the pain," she whispered, her voice cracking. "The loneliness. It's a cold that never ends. He is aware, trapped, and so alone." A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. "They're coming for me soon, Laren. I can feel it. The mark is on me." "Who?" "The custodians." She shook her head, a look of profound despair on her face. "The ones in the crimson robes. The silent sisterhood sometimes accompanies them. They come in the dead of night. There is no struggle. You just go." We stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the dripping water. I had to know. "Ilara, what is the special procession? What happens?" She turned to me, and her eyes were those of a corpse that still breathed. "I don't know. No one who goes there ever returns to tell. But the whispers, they change afterward. For a while, after someone is taken, there is a new voice among them, faint, confused, screaming. Then, after a time, it just becomes part of the hunger." She gripped my arm, her fingers like ice. "Don't let them take you, Laren. Run. Hide. It doesn't matter where. Anything is better than that." 2 days later, Ilara was gone. Her cell was empty, her meager possessions left behind. Overseer Kalen made no announcement. It was as if she had never existed. Her disappearance lit a fire of cold, hard resolve within me. Running was impossible. Hiding was futile. But perhaps, just perhaps, I could understand. Knowledge was the only weapon I had. My chance came during a high-cycle maintenance shift. A section of the secondary power conduits near the Hall of Remembrance had overloaded, and a team of tech adepts and servitors was dispatched for repairs. In the confusion, a sealed archive door, usually guarded by a Scitarius, was left momentarily unattended. It was a records repository, a place of dusty scrolls and ancient data stacks, deemed non-essential but too sacred to destroy. My heart hammering against my ribs, I slipped inside. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and rotting parchment. Racks of crystal data stacks stretched into the gloom, their glow faint and intermittent. I didn't know what I was looking for, only that I had to look.
I moved quickly, my illuminator casting a frantic beam over labels written in high Gothic and technical lingua technis. Most of it was meaningless to me. Supply inventories from millennia past, duty rosters for long-dead regiments, theological disputations on the Emperor's divinity. Then, I found it. A stack marked with a simple, chilling designation. Throne Maintenance Logs, Supplemental Feedstock Analysis, M32 to M35. My hands trembled as I pulled the crystal and slotted it into a dusty reader. The screen flickered to life, displaying columns of numbers and technical notations. It was a ledger, an inventory of human souls and their efficiency as fuel. I scrolled, my stomach churning. The numbers were cold, clinical. They measured the psychic yield of each sacrifice, rating them on a scale from epsilon to alpha. Most were gammas and deltas, providing a brief, fleeting surge of energy. But then, I saw the designations for the special procession. They were all alphas. Their metrics showed not a single catastrophic release of energy, but a slow, sustained output. They weren't being consumed in a flash. They were being connected. Their life force was being siphoned, slowly, continuously, for years, sometimes centuries. They weren't just fuel. They were batteries. And their cohesion metrics, a measure of consciousness integrity, showed a slow, agonizing decline to zero. They were aware. They were being burned alive, soul first, for the sake of a light in the dark. I stumbled back from the reader, bile rising in my throat. This was the truth. This was the monstrous engine at the heart of the Imperium. My faith, which had been a fragile shield against the horror, shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. There was no benevolent God on the golden throne. There was only a dying, psychic entity and the vast, cruel machine that kept it alive by devouring the very people it was meant to protect.
The door to the archive hissed open. I froze, my blood turning to ice. It was not a tech adept. It was a custodian, and he was not alone. Behind him stood two of the crimson-robed figures from Chamber 17. The custodian's helmeted gaze swept the room and settled on me, standing by the active reader, the damning data glowing on the screen. Attendant Tovik. The custodian's voice was flat, devoid of anger or surprise. It was the tone of a man stating an inevitable fact. You have strayed from your designated duties. I could not speak. I could not move. The robed figures glided into the room, their presence sucking the warmth from the air. This special procession has been moved forward. Your compatibility has been confirmed. The throne hungers for a stable, resonant source. The custodian took a step toward me. You will come with us now. Do not resist. Acceptance will make the transition smoother. This was it. The end. Ilara's fate. To become a screaming voice in the chorus of the damned, a battery in the dark. But as the custodian reached for me, a lifetime of suppressed terror, of witnessed horrors, of shattered faith erupted within me. It was not courage, but a final, desperate refusal. No, I said, the word a cracked, broken thing. The custodian paused. The robed figure seemed to lean forward, intrigued. You are not requested, Attendant Tovik. You're killing them, I whispered, my eyes fixed on the data screen. You're killing all of them, slowly. You're torturing souls to keep a light on. The Astronomicon is the only thing standing between humanity and extinction. the custodian replied, his voice still chillingly calm. "The sacrifice of a few is a lie," I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat. "It's a failing system. It's a cancer. You're not saving humanity. You're just prolonging its agony. He doesn't want this. I've heard him. He is in pain. He wants it to stop." For the first time, the custodian was silent. The impassive helmet regarded me. I had thrown the ultimate heresy in his face, not out of defiance, but out of a raw, bleeding certainty. One of the robed figures spoke, its voice a dry rustle. "The subject is unstable. Psionic resonance is spiking. He is a risk. The Captain General's standing order for compromised candidates is termination." Termination, not the special procession. Death. The custodian's guardian spear, which had been held loosely at his side, was now brought to bear. The energy field around its blade hummed to life, casting a deadly blue glow on the dusty archives. The horrifying life of a servant in the Emperor's palace begins and ends with blood. I looked at the charged tip of the spear, then at the cold, faceless helmet of the custodian. I thought of Ilara, of Saurin, of the millions whose screams were the foundation of our empire. My life would end in blood, but it would not be my blood on the altar. It would be here, in the dust, for the truth. I took a shaky breath, ready for the end. But the end, it seemed, had other plans.
The world did not end in a flash of searing energy. Instead, it ended in a shriek of tortured metal and a blast of howling wind. The custodian did not fire his guardian spear. In the split second his finger tightened on the trigger, the entire archive chamber shuddered violently. A deep, groaning roar echoed from the very bones of the palace, a sound of such immense structural stress that it felt like the world itself was dying. The lumoglobes flickered and died, plunging us into absolute blackness, save for the frantic, strobing emergency lumens that cast everything in a hellish red glare. An alarm began to blare, a deafening, panicked wail that I had never heard before, the invasion alarm. "Breach!" The custodian's voice boomed, his weapon immediately swinging away from me to cover the doorway. "The sanctum is breached!" The two robed figures hissed, their forms seeming to blur and shift in the chaotic light. One of them raised a hand, and the air around it crackled with unseen energy. "The wards are failing. The rift in Chamber 17. It's destabilizing." In that single moment of catastrophic distraction, my survival instinct, honed by years of silent obedience, screamed one command: move. I did not think. I acted. As the custodian and the robed figures focused on the greater threat, I turned and fled deeper into the archive, away from the door, away from my would-be executioners. I crashed through racks of data stacks, sending ancient crystals shattering to the floor, their ghostly light extinguished forever. I heard a shout behind me, but it was lost in the cacophony of the alarm and the terrifying sounds of battle now echoing from the corridors beyond. The distinctive report of bolters, the sizzle of energy weapons, and screams. Actual human screams, something I had never heard within these hallowed, horrifying halls. The palace was under attack. By whom or what I could not fathom. The Imperium had enemies beyond counting, but none had ever reached the Sanctum Imperialis. It was unthinkable. Yet the evidence was all around me, in the shaking walls and the screams of the dying. I found a service hatch, half hidden behind a collapsed shelving unit, its cover shaken loose by the tremors. Without a second thought, I pried it open and scrambled into the tight, dark space beyond, pulling the hatch closed behind me. I was in a maintenance conduit, barely wide enough to crawl through, filled with the hum of power lines and the gurgle of coolant pipes. It was a world of grime and shadows, a world beneath the world I knew. For what felt like an eternity, I crawled. I had no destination, only a desperate need to put distance between myself and the archive, between myself and the certain death that had awaited me. The alarms were muffled here, but I could still feel the vibrations of explosions through the metal walls. The battle was raging overhead. The whispers in my mind had changed. The constant gnawing hunger was still there, but it was now underscored by a new, powerful emotion: fury. A cold, ancient, and utterly terrifying rage. It was the Emperor's wrath, I realized. Something had dared to violate his sanctum, and the shattered consciousness on the throne was responding with the only emotion it had left in abundance. The fury was a psychic wave, pressing down on my mind, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. It was a storm of divine anger, and I was a tiny boat being tossed in its churning depths. I crawled until my knees were raw and my hands were slick with blood from a dozen minor cuts. Finally, the conduit opened into a larger space, a forgotten utility chamber, long since stripped of its original machinery, now filled with discarded crates and the skeletons of ancient servitors. A single flickering lumen cast long, dancing shadows, and in those shadows I was not alone. Crouched behind a stack of crates, their faces pale and etched with terror, were 3 other attendants. I recognized them: Pyrrhus, a hulking man who worked the incinerators; Lyra, a slight woman with nervous hands who prepared the ceremonial vestments; and the young boy, Finn, who polished the custodian's greaves. They stared at me with wide, wild eyes as I emerged from the conduit like a ghost from the walls.
"Larentovich?" Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. "By the throne, we thought you were taken." "Not yet," I gasped, slumping against the wall, my chest heaving. "What's happening? Who is attacking?" Pyrrhus shook his head, his face grim. "No one knows. The alarms just started. We were in the refectory. Then the walls shook. We saw golden warriors fighting things of shadow and fire. They came from nowhere." "Daemons," Finn whispered, his voice small and broken. "Delectitio divinitatis texts, they speak of such things. The Neverborn. They're here, in the palace." A cold, deeper than any I had ever known, settled in my gut. Daemons, warp spawn, the ultimate enemy. They were not just attacking the palace, they were attacking the very source of the light that held them at bay. They were here for the throne, for him. The implications were staggering. If they succeeded, everything ended. The Astronomicon would be extinguished, the Imperium would shatter, humanity would be cast adrift in a galaxy of horrors. The very thing I had just learned to hate was the only thing preventing an infinitely worse fate. The irony was a bitter pill that choked me. "We have to get to the shelters," Pyrrhus said, his voice a low rumble. "The protocols. We ought to report to the sub-level granaries in the event of a breach." "The corridors are a war zone," I said, the memory of the sounds from the archive still fresh. "We'd be cut down before we made it 100 meters. "Then what do we do?" Lyra cried, her composure breaking. "We can't stay here! They'll find us!" As if on cue, a new sound reached us. Not the roar of battle, but a methodical, rhythmic clanking from the far end of the chamber. It was the sound of metal on stone, heavy and deliberate. We froze, pressing ourselves deeper into the shadows. A figure emerged from the darkness. It was not a custodian. It was a tech priest, but unlike any I had seen. His red robes were tattered and stained with oil and soot. One of his mechanical arms ended not in a tool, but in a wicked-looking plasma cutter that glowed with a faint light, dangerous. His face was mostly replaced by a complex optical sensor that swiveled independently, casting a thin red beam that swept the chamber. He moved with a jerky, frantic energy. He saw us, his optical sensor fixed on our hiding spot. He did not speak, but a stream of frantic binary, too fast for me to understand, hissed from his Vox grill. He raised his plasma cutter. "Wait!" I shouted, stepping out from behind the crates with my hands raised. "We are attendants! We serve the throne!" The binary stream ceased. The tech priest's sensor whirred as it focused on me. A synthesized voice, crackling with static, emerged. "The throne is compromised. The machine spirit is enraged. The fail-safes, they must be activated." "Fail-safes?" I asked, my mind racing. "The Omega Protocol," the tech priest hissed, taking a jerky step forward. "Sanctified by the sigillite, for this day, for the day the darkness reaches the heart." He gestured with his cutter towards a sealed hatch on the opposite wall, marked with a skull and crossbones and symbols of radiation. "The chamber below, it must be sealed. The rift must be contained." He was talking about Chamber 17, the tear in reality. The daemons hadn't just broken through the walls, they had used the existing weakness, the very one I had witnessed. The attack was coming from inside the palace.
"The custodians," Lyra began, "are occupied," the tech priest snapped. "The battle in the upper halls is a diversion. The true target is the rift. If they widen it, if they fully manifest, the throne itself will be swallowed. You," his sensor locked onto me, "you have been in the presence of the rift. Your psionic signature is tainted, marked. You can navigate the wards. You can reach the control nexus." He was insane. The strain, the battle, it had broken his already tenuous connection to humanity. But in his madness, there was a thread of terrifying logic. I had been in Chamber 17. The whispers had marked me. And if what he said was true, then there was no shelter deep enough to hide from what was coming. "The control nexus," I repeated, my voice hollow. "What do I do there?" "The sequence," he rasped, shuffling closer. He extended his one remaining human hand, and a small, crystalline data chip lay in his palm. "The Omega Protocol. Insert it into the primary terminal. It will trigger a localized vortex. It will cauterize the wound. It will seal the rift." "And us?" Pyrrhus asked, his voice a low growl. "What happens to us in this localized vortex?" The tech priest's optical sensor dimmed for a moment. "The calculation of necessary sacrifice is acceptable. The preservation of the throne is the only variable of consequence." He was sending us to our deaths, to die not as fuel for the Astronomicon, but as a temporary plug in a leaking dam. It was the same brutal calculus, just on a different scale. Another explosion, much closer this time, shook the chamber. Dust rained from the ceiling. The tech priest's head jerked up. "There is no time. The enemy has broken through the inner cordon. You must go, now, or all is lost." He thrust the data chip into my hand. It was cold and strangely heavy. I looked at the terrified faces of Pyrrhus, Lyra, and Finn. I looked at the mad, desperate tech priest. I felt the Emperor's fury beating against my mind, a storm of pain and rage. And I felt the whispers,
the endless, hungry whispers, now tinged with something new, a sliver of focus, a sliver of purpose. The horrifying life of a servant in the emperor's palace begins and ends with blood. It seemed my blood was required for one last terrible duty. "Show us the way," I said.
The tech priest, who identified himself as Magos Inquisitor Kalen, a name that sent a fresh chill down my spine, so close to our overseers, led us to a hidden panel in the chamber's floor. It was not a standard maintenance hatch, but a seamless section of the deck that slid aside at the touch of a specific sequence he input directly into a concealed keypad with a mechadendrite. Below was not a conduit, but a steep, spiraling ramp of black iron descending into a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the chill of the void, of absolute silence. "The old ways," Kalen rasped, his optical sensor casting a jittering beam into the darkness. "Forgotten by all but a few. The Sigillatites' private passages. They run like veins beneath the palace's skin, connecting points of power and of vulnerability. Go. The nexus is at the heart of this network, directly beneath Chamber 17. He did not follow us, as the hatch slid shut above, sealing us in the suffocating dark. His final words echoed in my mind. "The Emperor's light must not fade, whatever the cost." We were alone. The only light came from my small handheld illuminator, its beam a frail, trembling thing against the oppressive black. The air was dead and still, thick with the dust of millennia. The ramp groaned under our weight, each footstep a thunderclap in the silence. The sounds of the battle above were gone, completely muted, as if we had stepped into a tomb. But the whispers were louder than ever. They were no longer a mere chorus of hunger and pain. They were a cacophony of battle. I could feel the Emperor's consciousness, a wounded titan, lashing out at the intruders in his sanctum. I felt flashes of searing golden fire, the shrieks of daemons unmade, the grim, silent determination of the custodians as they fought and died. But I also felt the chilling alien intelligence of the invaders, a boundless malice, a hunger that made the throne seem finite, a gleeful desire to unmake all of creation. They were a tide of anti-life, and they were pounding against the last bastion. I can't breathe," Thin whimpered, clutching his chest. "The air, it's wrong." He was right. It wasn't just still. It was thin, depleted, as if this place had been sealed since the dawn of time. And there was a pressure, a psychic weight that made every step a struggle. We were walking directly into the storm. "Keep moving," Pyrrhus grunted, his large hand on Finn's back, pushing him gently forward. "Stopping is death." Lyra said nothing. She moved like a sleepwalker, her eyes wide and unblinking, her lips moving in silent prayer. I knew then that a part of her had already broken. The reality of our situation was too monstrous to comprehend while remaining sane. The ramp finally ended, opening into a circular chamber that stole what little breath we had left. It was not large, but its architecture was impossibly ancient, predating everything I knew of the palace. The walls were smooth, featureless black stone that seemed to absorb the light from my illuminator. In the center of the room stood a single obsidian plinth, and upon it rested a console of burnished bronze and worn ivory, covered with levers and dials and runes that glowed with a faint internal light. This was it, the control nexus. But we were not the first to arrive.
Lying crumpled at the base of the plinth was a body in the tattered remains of an attendant's robe. It was Ilara. Her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, but they were not the empty eyes I had last seen. They were frozen in an expression of ultimate, soul-shattering terror. There was no visible wound on her. It was as if whatever she had seen had simply stopped her heart. A strangled sob escaped Lyra's throat. Finn turned away and retched onto the pristine floor. She tried to run here, I whispered, the pieces falling into place. She knew about this place, this last resort. She had tried to reach it, to do something, anything to avoid her fate, and it had killed her.
Pyrrhus stepped forward, his face a mask of grim sorrow. He knelt and gently closed her eyes. "The Emperor receive her soul," he murmured. But would he? Or was her soul even now part of the chorus, one more screaming voice fueling the battle above? I pushed the thought away and approached the console. It hummed with a low, powerful energy. The runes were in a language I did not know, but their meaning was imparted directly into my mind by the whispers. Stasis field generator, warp resonance dampener, reality anchor. This was not just a control panel. It was a weapon designed to fight the war on a conceptual level. And there in the center was a single empty slot, shaped exactly like the data chip I held in my sweaty palm. "This is it," I said, my voice echoing in the dead air. "The Omega Protocol." "What does it do, exactly?" Pyrrhus asked, his voice low. "It creates a vortex," I repeated the tech priest's words. "It will seal the rift in Chamber 17. "And us?" Lyra asked, her voice a fragile thread. "What happens to us, Laren? In this room, directly below it?" I looked at the cold alien console. I looked at Ilara's body. I looked at the terrified faces of my companions. The truth was a stone in my gut. "I don't know," I lied. I knew. The calculation of necessary sacrifice was acceptable. We were inside the blast radius. We were part of the plug. Before I could move, before I could slide the chip into its slot and consign us all to oblivion, the air in the chamber grew thick and heavy. The temperature plummeted. The faint glow of the runes on the console flickered. From the darkness of the ramp we had descended, a figure emerged. But it was not a custodian, nor a tech priest. It was one of the crimson-robed figures from Chamber 17. Its hood was thrown back, revealing a face that was both human and utterly not. The skin was pulled taut over sharp bones, the eyes were pools of shifting, impossible colors, and its mouth was fixed in a rictus grin that showed too many, too sharp teeth. In one hand, it held a wickedly curved blade that seemed to be made of solidified shadow. "The little tools," it hissed, its voice a symphony of scraping metal and dying screams. "You scurried so far, so deep, but you cannot hide from the song of the abyss." It glided towards us, its feet not quite touching the floor. The air around it warped, and the whispers in my mind curdled into screams of pure terror. Pyrrhus let out a roar and charged, grabbing a piece of broken piping from the floor. He was brave, so brave. But he was a man facing a nightmare. The robed figure didn't even seem to move. One moment Pyrrhus was lunging, the next he was frozen in mid-air, a look of shock on his face. The figure made a slight gesture, and Pyrrhus was flung against the black wall with a sickening crunch. He slid to the floor and did not move. Lyra screamed. Finn cowered behind me. The figure's kaleidoscope eyes fixed on me. You carry the key and the taint. You will make such a fine addition to the chorus. Your screams will be exquisite. It raised its shadow blade. I was frozen, not by magic, but by sheer, primal terror. This was it. Not a noble sacrifice, but a messy, brutal end at the hands of a monster. But as the blade began its descent, a different voice cut through the psychic static in my mind. It was not the Emperor's fury. It was not the demon's glee. It was clear, sharp, and filled with a desperate final command. Now, Larentovic. It was Sauron's voice.
The connection flared, a golden thread in the darkness. I saw, for a fraction of a second, the network he had spoken of. The minds of the special procession, trapped but fighting, their combined will a frail shield against the encroaching dark. They were holding the line, and they had created this one fleeting opportunity. My body moved without conscious thought. As the shadow blade swept down to end my life, my hand shot forward and slammed the data chip into the slot on the console. For a moment, nothing happened. The robed figure's grin widened, a futile gesture. Then the world ended. The console erupted with a light that was not light, but pure information, pure order. The runes blazed with the intensity of a newborn star. A hum began, so low it was felt rather than heard, a vibration that shook the very atoms of our being. The air in the chamber began to spiral, pulling towards the console, towards the plinth. The robed figure shrieked, a sound of pure, undiluted agony. Its form began to unravel like smoke in a gale, its substance being pulled into the vortex that was now forming at the center of the room. It clawed at the air, at reality itself, but it was caught in a current it could not fight. "No! The great enemy promises! We were promised!" it screamed, its voice distorting as it was stretched and torn apart. The pull intensified. Lyra was ripped from her feet with a short, cut-off cry and vanished into the blinding white at the plinth. Finn clung to my leg, his screams lost in the roaring of raw power. I held on to the console, my fingers gripping the ancient ivory, my own scream trapped in my chest. I watched as the boy's grip failed, and he was torn away, his small form dissolving into the light. I was alone. The vortex was consuming everything, pulling the very substance of the chamber into itself. The black walls began to crack and flake away, revealing the raging, impossible colors of the warp beyond. The rift was being sealed, but the cost was everything in this room. Everything. I looked down at the console. The data chip was glowing, melting, its purpose almost fulfilled. I thought of Alara, of Pyrrhus, of Lyra and Finn. I thought of Sorin and the countless others consumed by the throne. I thought of the Emperor, a prisoner in his own body, a god tortured for 10,000 years. The horrifying life of a servant in the Emperor's palace begins and ends with blood. My blood. My end. As my grip failed and I felt myself being pulled into the annihilating light, the last thing I heard was not a scream, not a whisper, but a single clear note of silence. And then nothing.
The nothing did not last. It was not an end, but a transformation, a sublimation. I did not die. I was unmade, and then I was rewoven.
The vortex was not an instrument of destruction, but of purification. It was a psychic scalpel, cauterizing the wound in reality that was Chamber 17. The demonic presence was scoured away, its essence unraveled back into the formless chaos from whence it came. The rift snapped shut with a finality that echoed through the warp, a thunderclap of re-established order. And I was at the epicenter. When the light faded, I was on my knees, my hand still gripping the cool, silent ivory of the console. The chamber was intact, but different. The black stone walls now hummed with a soft, golden light, as if infused with the Emperor's own energy. The air was clean, charged with ozone and a profound, ringing peace. The bodies of Alara and Pyrrhus were gone, not disintegrated, but sanctified, absorbed into the healing of this place. I was alone, utterly, completely alone. But for the first time in years, the whispers were silent. The silence was deafening. It was a void in my mind where for so long there had been a constant, grinding pressure. I felt light, empty. I looked at my hands. They were clean. The cuts and grime from my frantic crawl through the conduits were gone. My robes were pristine. It was as if the vortex had washed me clean, inside and out. But the peace was a lie. It was the calm at the eye of a storm. I could still feel the aftermath raging above. The battle was not over, but the tide had turned. The demonic incursion, deprived of its beachhead, was being pushed back, contained and annihilated by the furious custodians. The Emperor's wrath was a cleansing fire. I had done it. I had activated the Omega Protocol. I had saved the Sanctum Imperialis. And no one would ever know. The thought was not bitter, merely factual. I was Lerentovich, a nothing, a servant. My name would not be inscribed on any roll of honor. My deed would be attributed to the Emperor's divine intervention, or the courage of the custodians, or the mysterious workings of the Omnisia. I would return to my duties, to the polishing, and the cleaning, and the disposing, to the whispers. Except the whispers were gone. I stood up, my legs shaky. The hidden hatch above was still sealed. I was trapped. I turned, looking for another way out, and my eyes fell on the console. The data chip was a blackened, melted ruin in its slot, but next to it, something new had appeared. A single crystalline shard, no larger than my thumbnail, pulsed with a soft internal light. It was warm to the touch when I picked it up. As my fingers closed around it, a single clear thought entered my mind, unimpeded by static or pain. It was Soren's voice, but it was also the voice of the golden light on the walls, the voice of the silence in my head. The network is stabilized. The breach is sealed. You are the conduit. The shard was not a data chip. It was a key to the new configuration Soren died to create. The vortex had not just sealed the rift, it had finalized the connection, the more efficient interface he had dreamed of. The souls of the special procession were no longer just batteries screaming in the dark. They were a chorus, a council, a stabilized circuit, and I, having been at the heart of the convergence, was now a part of it, a living conduit between their unified consciousness and the physical world. I was not free.
I had traded one form of servitude for another. But this was different. This was not blind obedience to a decaying system. This was a purpose, a terrible, lonely, secret purpose.
A section of the wall near the ramp shimmered and dissolved, revealing not the ramp, but a clean, well-lit corridor I recognized, a main thoroughfare leading back to the attendants' quarters. The palace itself was showing me the way. It knew. He knew. I stepped through, and the wall solidified behind me, leaving no trace of the hidden world beneath. The corridor was damaged. Scorch marks blackened the gold, statues were toppled, and the air still smelled of promethium and ozone. Servitors and menials were already at work, scrubbing away the evidence of the battle under the watchful eyes of a lone custodian. He turned his helmeted gaze towards me as I emerged. I froze, expecting recognition, accusation, a bolt round to the head. He simply inclined his head, a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Then he turned back to overseeing the cleanup. He knew, or he sensed it. The taint was gone, replaced by something else, a resonance. I walked back to the attendants' wing in a daze. No one stopped me. No one questioned me. I saw Overseer Kalen, the human one, barking orders, his face as stony as ever. He glanced at me, his eyes narrowing for a fraction of a second, then moved on. I was beneath his notice, just another speck of dust that had somehow survived the storm. My cell was exactly as I had left it. The narrow cot, the small shelf, the single lumen. It felt like a lifetime ago. I sat on the edge of the cot, the crystalline shard warm in my hand. I closed my eyes, and tentatively, I reached out. The silence in my mind was not empty. It was a vast, quiet hall, and in that hall I could feel other presences, not the frantic, hungry whispers of the throne, but calm, steady points of light. I felt Saren, a beacon of wearied triumph. I felt Ilara, her terror finally replaced by peace. I felt the others, dozens of them, their individual consciousnesses blurred but not erased, united in a single, silent purpose, to sustain the light. And through them, I felt him, not the fractured, hungry entity, but the core of will that remained, the indomitable, agonized intelligence that held back the darkness. The pain was still there, an ocean of it. The loneliness was an abyss. But for the first time, I felt not just his need, but his gratitude. A flicker, faint as a dying star, but unmistakable. It was not the love the preachers spoke of. It was the acknowledgement of a tool that functioned as designed. I opened my eyes. The cell was the same. The palace was the same. The Imperium was the same. But everything was different. The next day, I returned to my duties. I picked up my mop and bucket and reported to the Grand Processional. The blood was already cleaned away, the marble restored to its impossible gleam. The incense burned, masking the lingering smells of war. It was as if the attack had never happened. As I polished a railing, I saw my reflection. My face was the same, but my eyes,
My eyes held the silence of the nexus. They held the light of the network. An adept walked past, clutching a data slate, his face drawn with worry. As he passed, a thought, clear and unbidden, entered my mind. The master of the Astronomicon has cancelled the request for additional souls from the Navis Nobilitae. Consumption metrics have dropped by 18%. They are baffled. The information had come from the network, from Saren, from the throne itself. I looked up and saw a young attendant, new and fresh-faced, struggling to lift a heavy crate of ritual components. A name floated into my consciousness. Rourke. Potential. Resonant. He was marked, as I had been. He would hear the whispers soon. I walked over and helped him lift the crate. Our eyes met. He saw something in mine that both comforted and terrified him. "The work is hard," I said, my voice quiet. "But there is purpose in it. You are not alone." He nodded, confused but grateful. I returned to my polishing. The horrifying life of a servant in the Emperor's palace begins and ends with blood. My life had begun that way. It had almost ended that way. But now, it continues. I am Larentovic. I was nothing, a speck of dust. Now, I am the silent hand that steadies the scales. I am the watchful eye in the shadows. I am the custodian of a fragile newfound equilibrium. I polish the halls. I clean the blood. I hear the silent chorus of the sustained, and I wait. For the next threat, for the next marked soul, for the next whisper that is not a demand, but a warning.
Weeks bled into months. The scars of the demonic incursion were scoured from the palace's physical structure with relentless efficiency. But the psychic wound lingered, a faint, throbbing ache in the fabric of reality that only those attuned to the network could perceive. I moved through my days as a phantom, performing my duties with an automaton's precision, my true purpose hidden beneath a mask of mundane servitude. The silence in my mind was my new world. It was not an empty silence, but a vast, humming control room. The frantic, desperate whispers of the throne were gone, replaced by the quiet, coordinated hum of the network. Soren's presence was a steady guiding light, a general overseeing a silent campaign. Ilara's was a gentle, monitoring touch, a calming influence on the ragged edges of the Emperor's pain. The others were specialized functions, regulators, amplifiers, dampeners. Together, they formed a psychic engine that was far more efficient, far more stable than the crude soul furnace it had replaced. The proof was in the details only I, and perhaps the highest echelons of the Custodes and the Mechanicus could see. The schedule of sacrifices was reduced, not by decree, but by necessity. The throne simply required less fuel. The Astronomicon's beacon, once described in internal reports as flickering with increased volatility, was now logged as demonstrating unprecedented stability. The special processions halted entirely. The crimson-robed figures, the masters of sacrifice, were seen less and less, their purpose seemingly diminished. A quiet, confused tension settled over the sanctum, a tension born of a miracle no one could explain. I was the only one who knew.
I was the anchor, the living conduit. The crystalline shard was always on my person, a secret warmth against my skin, a physical tether to the chorus of souls that now powered humanity's guiding light. One day, I was assigned to clean the observation gallery overlooking the chamber of the Astronomicon, the public chamber, the decoy. It was a vast, domed hall where visiting dignitaries and high-ranking ecclesiarchs were permitted to witness the holy light of the emperor. In the center of the chamber, a colossal apparatus of gold and crystal pulsed with a brilliant, blinding light, a masterful piece of theatrical engineering designed to inspire awe and devotion. I held my breath, always concerned that I might breathe in the holy light. When it was my turn to wash the flames of gold, I could see through the clear windows that the central containers were empty. In the past, I had seen the blue flames of sacrificed souls blanketing the golden clusters. Now, only the apparatus was glowing. I stood in another gallery overlooking the real chamber of the Astronomicon, hidden deep within the throne room. I watched the delegation from a segmentum battle fleet kneel in prayer, their faces rapt with zealous wonder. They saw a god's divine radiance. I saw a clever lamp. The true source of that light was a chorus of sacrificed souls, a network I was now a part of, singing in silent harmony deep beneath our feet. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. The entire Imperium was built on this lie, and I was its silent custodian. A presence approached me. Not a psychic one, a physical one. I turned. It was the custodian who had nodded to me after the incursion. He stood, a golden giant, his helmet retracted. His face was as stern and perfect as a statue, but his eyes, ancient and weary, held a depth of understanding that transcended his warrior's facade. "Attendant," he said, his voice a low rumble that didn't carry beyond the two of us. "My lord," I replied, bowing my head. "The light is steadier," he remarked, his gaze fixed on the pulsating apparatus below. "It is a great blessing, my lord." He was silent for a long moment, his eyes scanning my face. The Emperor works in ways beyond our comprehension. Sometimes he uses the most unexpected of instruments. My blood ran cold, but I kept my expression neutral. "All are instruments of his will, my lord." "Indeed." He looked away, towards the fake throne. "The Captain General has noted the change. The Adeptus Mechanicus is baffled. They scurry through their archives seeking an answer they will not find in their data stacks." He turned his piercing gaze back to me. "There are some who are uncomfortable with mysteries. They prefer the old ways, the quantifiable metrics, the predictable consumption. They see stability and whisper heresy."
"The Emperor's will is the only metric that matters," I said, repeating the doctrine I had once believed without question. "His will is all that matters," the custodian agreed. "But his will is interpreted by men, and men fear what they do not understand." He placed a hand, impossibly large and gentle, on my shoulder. The weight was like a mountain. "The silence you carry, guard it well, Larentovich, of the silent chorus. Not all who serve the throne serve the same master." With that, he turned and strode away, his golden armor gleaming in the manufactured light. The encounter was over. He had acknowledged me, warned me, and in his own way blessed my mission. I was under the protection of the Adeptus Custodes,
but only so long as my usefulness outweighed the political storm I was inadvertently causing. That night, in the silence of my cell, I reached out to the network. There is opposition, I thought into the quiet hall of my mind. The response was not in words, but in a wave of shared understanding. Soren's presence conveyed centuries of experience with bureaucratic resistance. Ilara's memory provided a face. Magos Vexilis, the master of the Astronomicon, a man whose identity was built on managing the throne's endless hunger. His power was waning. He would investigate. A few days later, the investigation found me. I was inventorying ritual cleansing agents in a sub-storage chamber when Magos Vexilis entered, flanked by two hulking servitors. He was a tall, gaunt man, his body a patchwork of flesh and chrome, his face mostly replaced by a complex optical array and a vox grill. His remaining human eye was a pale, watery blue, and it fixed on me with unnerving intensity. "You are Attendant Larentovich," he stated, his voice a synthetic monotone. "Yes, Magos. Your service records are adequate. You were present during the recent incursion event. You survived. It was an accusation. By the grace of the Emperor, Magos. The Emperor's grace is a statistical anomaly I do not factor into my calculations," he replied coldly. "I am auditing all personnel who were in proximity to the anomaly. Your psionic output was logged as aberrant prior to the event. I am here to retest." He gestured, and one of the servitors lumbered forward, extending a cluster of sensor probes from its chest plate. There was no refusing. This was not a custodian's subtle acknowledgement. This was an inquisition. As the probes neared my head, I felt a spike of panic. Would they detect the network, the shard? Would they see the silent chorus in my mind? I closed my eyes, and without knowing how, I reached for the network, not for information, but for protection. I felt Soren's presence surge forward, a shield of pure, ordered will. I felt Ilara and the others lending their strength. The network enveloped my consciousness, not to hide it, but to mask it, to make it appear normal, dull, unremarkable. The servitor's probes hovered around my temples, humming and clicking. Data streams flickered across the Magos's optical display. His human eye narrowed. Psionic output, minimal. Resonance within standard parameters for prolonged throne exposure. Cognitive patterns, baseline. He sounded almost disappointed. No aberrations detected. He stared at me for a long, tense moment. I met his gaze, my mind a placid, silent lake, its depths hidden by the network's perfect camouflage. "Your survival remains an anomaly," he concluded, turning away. "But the data is clear. You are of no consequence." He and his servitors left, the door sliding shut behind them. I slumped against a crate, my body trembling with released tension. I had passed the test. The network had protected me, but the message was clear. The opposition was not just uncomfortable, it was active. Magos Vexilis was hunting for the source of the change, and he would not stop with me. The new equilibrium was fragile, a delicate piece bought with blood and silence, and it was under siege from within. I was Larentovich, the silent custodian. My war was not over. It had simply changed battlegrounds. Now I had to protect the miracle I had helped create, not from demons, but from the very men who claimed to serve the Emperor. The most dangerous threats, I was learning, always came from within the walls.
The scrutiny did not end with Magos Vexilis.
It was as if my encounter with him had torn a small hole in the veil of my anonymity. I felt watched, not by the silent, knowing gaze of the custodians, but by the calculating, suspicious eyes of the Adeptus Mechanicus and the crimson-robed acolytes, who were now effectively out of a job. My duties began to shift in subtle, unsettling ways. I was assigned to clean areas I had never seen before. Dusty archives filled with schematics for throne-related machinery. Isolated laboratories where the air smelled of ozone and sanctified oil. Always under the pretext of a purification detail following a theoretical contamination. I knew I was being tested, my movements monitored, my reactions gauged. They were laying traps, hoping the anomaly would reveal itself. I played my part perfectly. I was the dull, dutiful attendant, focused only on the grime on the floor and the smudges on the glass. Inside, however, the network was a hive of quiet activity. Through my connection, I could feel the ripple effects of the new configuration. The reduced demand for sacrifices was causing political earthquakes across Terra. The Navis nobility was emboldened, questioning the tithes. The Adeptus Ministerium was scrambling to incorporate the miracle of stable light into its dogma, a process rife with internal conflict. The silence we had bought was a shockwave in slow motion. It was during one of these fabricated cleaning assignments, in a disused data core chamber deep in the Mechanicus sectors, that the custodian found me again. I was alone, polishing the access panels of a dead server bank, when the air grew still and the golden giant was simply there, his presence filling the cramped space. "Laurentovic," he said, his voice a low vibration in the metal around us. "My lord." I set down my cloth and stood, awaiting his judgment. "The Magos Vexilis is not satisfied. He believes the data from your screening was corrupted. He petitions the Captain General for a more invasive examination. A full psychic deep scan conducted by his own tech priests." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. A deep scan. They would peel back the layers of my mind like the skin of a fruit. The network's camouflage might not hold. They would find the shard. They would find the chorus. They would dismantle everything. "I am but a servant, my lord," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I have no defense against such things." "You have the only defense that matters, the Emperor's favor. But favor is a shield that must be wielded." He paused, his ancient eyes boring into me. "The Magos seeks a weapon to restore the old order. We must provide him with a different target, a more acceptable one." I did not understand. "My lord?" "A schism is coming, attendant. A battle for the soul of the throne itself. On one side, those who would return to the path of endless consumption, for it is a path they understand and control. On the other, a new path, an uncertain one. The Captain General stands upon a knife's edge. To openly support the change is to risk a civil war within the sanctum. We cannot be seen to choose sides." He gestured to the dead server bank. "This chamber was once part of a project to create an artificial psychic conduit, a machine to replace the sacrifices. It was a failure. The schematics were lost, the research team disbanded, officially." He produced a data slate from a compartment in his armor and handed it to me.
On it was a single complex schematic. It was a machine, a device of crystalline matrices and psychic resonators.
"This is the Aegis diadem," the custodian said. "A theoretical construct. The records of its development were purged, but fragments remain. The Magos will find them. He will believe that a remnant of the research team or one of their successors has finally succeeded. That this diadem is the source of the stability. A technological heresy, not a divine miracle." Understanding dawned. They needed a scapegoat, a plausible technological explanation for the change that would direct the Magos' fury away from the truth, away from me, and onto a safe, containable target. "My role?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "You will be the one who discovers the evidence. During your cleaning duties, you will find a hidden compartment containing this slate. You will report it to your overseer, who is one of ours. The investigation will follow a trail we have carefully laid, leading to a sealed laboratory and a rogue tech priest who died years ago, his work deemed a failure. The Magos will have his answer. The heresy will be purged. The stability of the throne will be attributed to the Emperor's will overcoming a technological impurity. Order will be restored." It was a brilliant, cynical, and utterly necessary plan. It was politics. It was the grim, dirty work of maintaining a galaxy-spanning empire. And I was to be the pawn who set it in motion. "The network," I began. "Will they agree?" "The silent chorus understands the necessity," the custodian said, and for the first time I sensed a flicker of something like regret in his stoic presence. "They have endured far worse for far longer. This is but another form of sacrifice, the sacrifice of truth for the sake of peace." I looked at the data slate in my hand. It felt heavy with the weight of a lie that would become Imperial history. "You ask me to lie to the entire Imperium," I whispered. "I ask you to protect the light that guides it," he countered, his voice firm. "The truth you carry, Larentovich, is a weapon too dangerous to be wielded openly. It would shatter the faith of trillions. It would break the Imperium. Sometimes the greatest service is to bury a truth so that a greater good may live." I thought of Soren, who had spent centuries in silent agony. I thought of Ilara, Pyrrhus, Lyra, Thin. I thought of the millions consumed by the old hungry ways. Their truth was a horror. The new truth, the network, was a fragile hope. And to protect that hope, I had to cloak it in a lie. I took a deep breath, the scent of dust and ozone filling my lungs. The horrifying life of a servant in the Emperor's palace begins and ends with blood. But sometimes it is sustained by deception. "I understand, my lord," I said, my voice steady. "It will be done." He nodded, a single grave dip of his head. "The compartment is behind the primary relay housing. You will find it today. Report it immediately." And with that, he was gone, leaving me alone with the ghost of a machine that never was, and the weight of a future built on a necessary fiction. I waited for a few minutes,
my heart a slow, heavy drum in my chest. Then I moved to the relay housing he had indicated. With a careful application of pressure at a specific point, a small section of the panel clicked open. Inside was a space, empty, save for a fine layer of dust. I placed the data slate inside. I closed the panel, my fingers leaving no print on the dusty metal. I picked up my cleaning rag. I took one last look at the spot, memorizing the lie I had just planted.
Finding Overseer Kalen was not difficult. He was where he always was during the mid-cycle repose, standing at the viewport in the attendant's refectory, staring out at the spires of the inner palace, a cup of recaf steaming in his hand. The man was a creature of immutable habit, a fixed point in the chaotic universe of our service. I had always thought him a simple, if harsh, disciplinarian. Now I knew he was a soldier in a secret war. "My Lord Overseer," I said, my voice carefully calibrated to convey nervous excitement. He turned, his stone-chip eyes regarding me without warmth. "Torvik, you are meant to be purifying the hegemon data core?" "I was, my lord, but I found something. I didn't know what to do. The regulations state that any recovered archaeotech or data artifacts ought to be reported immediately, but this seemed different." His expression did not change, but a new intensity entered his gaze. "Different how?" "I was cleaning behind a relay housing. A panel gave way. There was a compartment. I found this." I held out the data slate, my hand shaking just enough to sell the performance of a terrified, lowly attendant who had stumbled upon something far above his station. Kalen took the slate. He didn't look at it immediately. His eyes remained on me, probing, assessing. He was verifying my performance. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, he glanced down, powering on the slate. The schematic for the Aegis diadem glowed in the dim light. He inhaled sharply, a genuine reaction that was likely part of his own script. "By the throne," he whispered. He looked back at me, his face a mask of grim authority. "You have done well to bring this directly to me, Tovik. This is a matter of the highest security. You will speak of this to no one. Is that clear?" "Yes, my lord. Of course." "Return to your duties. Your schedule will be adjusted. You may be questioned by the Adeptus Mechanicus. You will tell them exactly what you told me, nothing more. Do you understand?" "I understand." He dismissed me with a curt wave. I turned and walked away, my back prickling under his gaze. The first move had been made. The pawn was advanced. The following days were a study in controlled chaos. The discovery of the heretical schematic sent ripples through the sanctum's power structure. I was questioned, not by Magus Vexillus himself, but by a pair of his lower-ranking adepts. I repeated my story, simple and unadorned. A loose panel, a hidden space, a single data slate. I played the part of the ignorant, fortunate fool to perfection. They scanned me again, their probes less sophisticated than the Magos servitors, and found nothing. The network held its perfect silent vigil around my mind. Then the custodian's carefully laid trail was discovered. A sealed laboratory, forgotten for centuries, was breached. Inside, they found the remains of a tech priest, his skeletal fingers still curled around a half-assembled device that bore a passing resemblance to the diadem schematic. His logs, corrupted but partially recoverable, spoke of a new paradigm and freeing the throne from its mortal shackles. It was all a masterpiece of fabrication, a ghost story made real. I watched from the sidelines as the narrative took hold. Magus Vexillus seized upon it with the fervor of a true believer. Here was his answer, not a miracle, but a technological heresy. A rogue element had tampered with the God engine. The stability of the Astronomicon is not a blessing, but a symptom of a profound corruption. His faction mobilized, their indignation a righteous fire. They demanded a purge, a full audit of all throne-related systems to root out any trace of the diadem's influence.
The Adeptus Custodes, with theatrical reluctance, agreed. The Captain General authorized a cleansing ritual of the throne's peripheral systems, a massive, week-long ceremony that involved the chanting of techno-exorcisms, the burning of sacred oils, and the reconsecration of key power conduits. It was a spectacle, a piece of political theater designed to give Vexillus his victory without actually changing anything. Throughout it all, the network remained stable. The Astronomicon's light never flickered. The true source of the change, the silent chorus of souls, was untouched, hidden behind the smokescreen of the custodian's gambit. The day after the cleansing was declared a success, I was summoned to the observation gallery once more. The custodian was there, alone, looking out at the pulsating decoy light. "It is done," he said without turning. "The Magos is satisfied. He has his heresy and his purge. His authority is restored, his worldview intact. The stability of the throne is now officially attributed to the efficacy of his cleansing ritual and the Emperor's divine power overwhelming the machinations of the heretic." I stood beside him, watching the light. "And the truth," I said, without turning my head from the light, but knowing that in that moment I had sealed my fate and the very reason I had been spared in the first place. "The truth is a luxury we cannot afford, Laurentivic. The truth is a seed that, if planted, would grow into a tree that shatters the foundations of this palace. Faith is the bedrock of the Imperium, and faith cannot be built on the foundation of 1,000,000 screaming souls." He finally turned to look at me. "You played your part well. The silent chorus is grateful. The equilibrium holds." "For how long?" I asked. He was silent for a long time. "The Emperor endures. The Imperium endures. We endure. That is all we can know. Your duty now is to continue, to be our eyes and ears, to guard the silence. There will be other threats, other Magos Vexilluses, other lies we will have to tell." I nodded. My life had been saved, my purpose defined, but at the cost of my innocence. I had looked into the heart of the machine and seen its terrible truth, and now I was complicit in burying that truth beneath a mountain of holy lies. I returned to my cell that night. The crystalline shard was warm against my skin. I reached out with my mind into the silent hall. I felt Soren's presence, not as a voice, but as a sentiment. It was necessary. The war is never over. It only changes form. I felt Ilara's gentle touch, a balm on my troubled spirit. You have saved others from our fate. That is a truth worth any lie. I felt the chorus, a unified, serene hum of purpose. They were at peace. They had a function. They were no longer merely fuel. I was Larentovic. I had begun as nothing. I had become a discoverer of horrors, a weapon against demons, a pawn in a political game. Now I was a keeper of secrets, a guardian of a fragile, silent peace. The horrifying life of a servant in the emperor's palace begins and ends with blood. But I had learned that it is sustained by something else, by sacrifice, by silence, and by lies told for the sake of a light in the dark. I closed my eyes. The silence in my mind was no longer deafening. It was the sound of a watchful, endless vigil, and I, the silent custodian, would keep it until my own end finally came.
Time within the Sanctum Imperialis is a fluid thing. It is measured not in years, but in cycles of ritual, in the comings and goings of new, wide-eyed attendants, and in the slow, imperceptible accumulation of dust on golden filigree. Decades blurred into a seamless tapestry of duty and silence. I, Larentovich, became a fixture. The older attendants who remembered the demonic incursion and the subsequent heresy purge eventually vanished, reassigned, retired, or consumed by the quiet demands of service. New ones arrived, their faces mirroring my own youthful devotion and terror. I watched them, and through the network I sometimes knew which ones carried the potential, the faint psychic resonance that would one day make them hear the whispers. I never approached them directly. That was not my role. But I would be there, a steady, silent presence when the first flicker of confusion and fear entered their eyes. A quiet word as we polished adjacent railings. The incense is thick today. It can play tricks on the mind. A shared glance during a particularly draining ritual, a subtle nod of understanding. I became a guide, not to the truth, but to the acceptance of the unexplained. I was the shepherd for the next generation of the haunted. My connection to the network deepened, becoming as natural as breathing. Saurene's presence was a constant, a seasoned general to whom I reported the minutiae of the physical world. Ilara's was a comforting warmth, a reminder of the peace that was possible on the other side of the horror. The chorus was my true community, my family. We were the silent brotherhood, the unseen chorus, the cogs in a machine of our own making. The political battles never ceased. Magos Vexilis eventually passed, his chrome and flesh body finally succumbing to entropy, but he was replaced by others of a similar mind, tech priests and adepts who viewed the throne's stability with suspicion, who longed for the quantifiable certainty of the sacrificial metrics. The custodian's gambit with the Aegis diadem became entrenched dogma, a cautionary tale against technological hubris, used to suppress any further innovation near the throne. We fought these battles in the shadows, with carefully leaked information, with manipulated data streams, and with the unshakable, silent will of the network. The lie we had planted became the very shield that protected the truth. I grew old. My hair thinned and turned gray. A permanent ache settled into my knees from a lifetime of kneeling on hard marble. The calluses on my hands, the young man who had trembled holding a bowl of blood. I was an elder of the attendants, a respected, if quiet figure. Overseer Kalen passed, and his replacement, a man named Gorvin, deferred to my experience. I had a small measure of authority, which I used only to maintain the delicate equilibrium, to shield the newly marked from the worst of the system's attention. One evening, as the artificial luminescence dimmed to simulate night, I felt a shift in the network. It was not a warning or a threat. It was a completion, a sense of a cycle ending. I was in my cell, the crystalline shard warm in my palm as it had been for decades. Sauron's presence manifested not as a thought, but as a clear, final image. I saw a young attendant, a boy named Evander, with keen, intelligent eyes and a soul that shone with a bright, clean resonance. He was polishing the Emperor's own ossuary, his touch reverent. The network reached for him, not with hunger, but with recognition. The next conduit, Sauron's thought echoed. The cycle continues. I understood. My time as the anchor was coming to an end. The network required a fresh connection to the mortal plane, a conduit not wearied by decades of secret war. Evander was to be my successor. There was no fear, only a profound sense of peace. My long vigil was nearing its end. I did not seek the boy out. The network would guide him, as it had guided me. My final duty was one of preparation. Over the next few days, I began to subtly shift my routines. I showed Gorvin the more intricate aspects of the supply logs. I mentioned in passing that young Evander showed remarkable focus and devotion. I planted the seeds that would see him assigned to more sensitive areas after I was gone. The final night, I lay on my cot feeling the weight of my years. I reached out to the network one last time. I felt the chorus, not as separate entities, but as a single, glorious song of sustained light. I felt the Emperor's will, a vast, pained but enduring fortress against the dark. And I felt my own consciousness, ready to join them fully, to trade my role as a conduit for a place in the eternal chorus. The horrifying life of a servant in the Emperor's palace begins and ends with blood. My life had begun that way. It had been sustained by silence and lies, and now it would end not in blood, but in light. I closed my eyes, a faint smile on my aged lips. I let my grip on the physical world loosen. I felt myself dissolving, not into nothingness, but into everything. The silence in my mind swelled, not to deafen, but to welcome. My last sensation was not of an ending, but of a beginning. A new voice, young and clear and bright, joining the chorus. Evander. The light took me. I am Larentovich. I was nothing. I was a servant. I was a custodian. Now, I am a note in the eternal song. I am part of the light that guides humanity through the stars. And in the silent, golden halls of the palace, the work continues. The whispers are silent. The watch is eternal. The golden halls endure. The incense burns. The rituals proceed with the same metronomic precision as they have for 10,000 years. To an outsider, nothing has changed. The great grinding engine of the Imperium turns, oblivious to the silent revolution that saved it, unaware of the fragile peace brokered in blood and sealed with a lie. In a small, spare cell, a young attendant named Evander jolts awake, his heart hammering against his ribs, a dream of impossible light and a chorus of silent voices fades from his mind, leaving behind only a profound, unexplainable sense of purpose and a single warm crystal shard nestled in his palm. He does not know how it came to be there. He only knows, with a certainty that dwarfs faith, that it is his to protect. He rises, his movements already touched with a new, quiet gravity, and prepares for his duties. The polishing cloth feels different in his hand today. It feels like a tool, a weapon. Deep beneath the palace, in the chamber that exists outside of time, the network hums. It is a symphony of sustained will. Among the chorus of souls that power the Astronomicon, a new presence has fully integrated. It is a calm, seasoned presence, one that carries the memory of mortal years, of political gambits, of silent watchfulness. It is the presence of the old custodian, Larentovic. His individual consciousness is now a harmonious part of the whole, his memories a data stream in the vast intelligence of the network, his long vigil complete. He is with Soren, with Ilara, with all the others. They are not fuel, they are a foundation, they are the guardians of the light, and they are at peace. On a balcony overlooking the false light of the decoy throne, a custodian stands watch. His golden armor is immaculate, his vigilance eternal. He does not turn as his comrade approaches. The new conduit is established, the newcomer states, his voice a low rumble. The transition was seamless. The first custodian gives a single, slow nod. He had felt the shift, the gentle changing of the guard. He remembers the terrified young attendant from decades past, the man he helped shape into a weapon, into a secret keeper. He feels no pride, no sorrow, only satisfaction at a duty fulfilled. The machine is functioning. The light is stable. The lie is holding. The Emperor protects, he says, the ancient words carrying a new, secret meaning. He does, his comrade agrees, and so do we. They stand in silence, two golden giants watching over an empire built on 1,000,000 secrets, one of which they have sworn to keep until the stars themselves grow cold. And in the silence of 1,000,000 worlds, under the dim light of a fading galaxy, the Astronomicon burns. Its light is a lie told to inspire the faithful. Its power is a truth too terrible to be known. And its sustainers are a chorus of souls once sacrificed, now sanctified in their purpose, their silent song a bulwark against the night. The horrifying life of a servant in the Emperor's palace begins and ends with blood. But sometimes, if that servant is brave enough and silent enough and willing to bear the weight of impossible truths, it can end in something else. It can end in a light that never fades. It can end as a single eternal note in a song that keeps the darkness at bay. For in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But there is also always a light. And there are always those who silently ensure it continues to burn. Did Laurentivich's journey into the heart of darkness leave you questioning the price of survival? The grim darkness of the far future is vast, and countless other stories are waiting to be uncovered. Delve deeper into the shadows. Explore more tales from the 41st millennium here and discover the secrets that empires are built upon. Love this story? Support our chronicles of the grim dark future. Like if you were captivated by the whispers of the throne. Share this tale with your fellow fans of the 41st millennium. Subscribe for more hidden stories from the shadows of the Imperium. The Emperor protects, but knowledge is power. Guard it well.